Hello, everybody. Good to see you. It's great to be here. I love the energy here. I'm Alex Pascal. I'm the new executive director of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, which is not, a bit of a mouthful. Yesterday was only my 50th day at BKC, so basically, I just found the bathroom and the coffee maker, and to be honest, I'm not even sure if I'm in the right room. But actually the truth is, I know I'm in the right place because I can feel the energy and the excitement here, and I've been hearing about this annual event since before I even started the job. Which brings me to a bit of a confession that maybe I shouldn't make. Until I started this job, the only launch that I knew was a trampoline park in Framingham, where I took my kids to birthday parties to be massively overstimulated. So the good news is that BKC is already expanding my horizons. In all seriousness though, I've heard for years from friends and colleagues what an incredible, dynamic, and warm community BKC has. And for the last 7 weeks, as I've come on board in this role, I've seen that spirit manifest in your emails, in your outreach, and your warm welcomes. And we saw it in the session that Charlie Nesson just ran, so thanks again to Charlie for that. I want to particularly thank Jay-Z, the BKC team, and the BKC board for welcoming and supporting me with good humor and lots of patience. I've spent most of my career in the federal government, where incoming political appointees are sometimes greeted, and often rightly so, with suspicion and cynicism. But my experience at BKC could not be further from the archetypal DC welcome. Even though I haven't been here long, it's been long enough to know that I've encountered and joined a team of incredible kindred spirits. See, I come from the world of policymaking and public service, and I've always been motivated to make people's lives better, richer, more meaningful, and to do so at scale. And at BKC, I already know I found a community that's motivated by the same ambitions. So the first thing I want to do is offer a warm welcome to you, to everyone in the room, to those new to the community and those who've been coming to launch for years. We're grateful you're here. Thank you. Secondly, I want to thank my incredible BKC teammates who worked tirelessly for months to put launch together. Organizing launch takes a village, to be sure, but I wanted to shout out in particular Chelsea, Jay, Becca, Ellen, Jess, Shelby, Cruz, Nadia, Kaylee, Margaret, and Tony for everything you've done to make this week happen. Thank you. So we're gathering today at a moment, I think, of profound and sweeping change. Much of it due to the advent and rapid dissemination of new digital technologies into society over the last 30 years. We see and experience this change in our institutions, in our communities, in our politics and our economy, in our relationships with each other and with the planet, and I would even say, in our sense of what it means to be a human being right now in this moment. I don't think I'm alone in feeling tremendous uncertainty and anxiety about this change. But I also believe that we can and must engage it with intentionality to make sense of it and to shape it. If we can do this, I believe the change that feels so dramatic and often, at least to me, so overwhelming can yield great opportunity. This, I believe, is true for the world, for Harvard, and for BKC. It's why I want to be right here, right now. It's why I started working on tech policy years ago, because I care deeply about impact. As a policymaker and a scholar, I was drawn to BKC because it felt like the rare place where people were asking the same hard questions that I was, and doing so with rigor, with creativity, with a deep sense of public purpose, and a zealous desire for impact. As a center and a community, we are entrepreneurial and ecumenical, collaborative and curious, interdisciplinary, and imaginative. We're a place of constructive criticism and a place of possibility. We are thinkers and doers, builders and problem solvers in the public interest. And to make an absolutely terrible pun, we are generative intelligence and there's nothing artificial about it. Jay-Z has a mantra about the 3 laws of digital governance that I think applies even more broadly to how we understand technology in this moment. We don't know what we want, we don't trust anyone to give it to us, and we want it now. Consider, for example, agentic AI, self-propelled fragments of code that cross the internet to deliver on someone's goals that they've been set out to do. whose actions will have enormous impact on lots and lots of people's lives. To what ends are such agents being built? Whom will they serve? How could they benefit people? What shouldn't they do? How do we stop them from doing those things? How will they interact with each other? How should they? Who should take responsibility when something inevitably goes wrong? These are questions of engineering and philosophy, law and business, policy and social science, and so much else. They are interdisciplinary to their core, and they are urgent. They are BKC questions, and BKC must be at the forefront of answering them. This organization is 30 years old. This community is 30 years old. And the world needs it more than ever. We need to be a center that helps society figure out what it wants from technology through open-minded civil discourse, comparison, and ideally reconciliation of divergent viewpoints, and productive intellectual friction. We need to be a trusted place that generates new ideas, initiatives, collaborations, and technologies that make people's lives better and improve the lived experience of technology. We need to be a place that helps people flourish in this era of sweeping technological change. And we need to do this essential work with urgency, humility, and patience. To meet this moment of sweeping change, BKC must continue to evolve as an organization, and it will. Our community of fellows and faculty, affiliates and alumni, students and scholars is unique. It is one of our superpowers. You are one of our superpowers. And we are as excited as ever to enlist and engage you in this mission and in our evolution. I invite you to bring your ideas and research, questions, and conversation into this conversation and today. To collaborate, learn, ask for help, share your expertise today and throughout the year. I very much look forward to learning with you and from you. So let's start the learning. We have 3 terrific sessions today that roughly reflect BKC's recent, past, present, and future. The first is a panel to hear about the insights and lessons learned from the 3-year pop-up Institute for Rebooting Social Media, from those who helped define it. I want to congratulate RSM alumni and faculty for their contributions to advance research and public discourse in this space. Second is a set of demos of public interest tech products that the Applied Social Media Lab has been developing and will be working to launch next year. And we'll give you a taste of them and then invite you to be our guinea pig beta testers throughout the year as we roll out these ASML products. And finally, we have a great panel to unpack agentic AI and probe beneath the 24/7 hype to showcase the kind of research workstreams BKC plans to pursue in the coming year. I hope you'll find them, all of these panels, massively overstimulating, kind of like an intellectual trampoline park. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panel, Reboot, Rebuild, Reimagine, Social Media Research Then and Now, and invite to the proverbial stage RSM alums Joe Back-Coleman, Professor Kate Klonick, and Professor David Nimmer, and RSM Faculty Co-Director James.
Well, let me just reiterate, I'm so glad to see so many people here, people we know already, people who are new. This is great. Any of you who've ever run an event know that like your deepest fear is like no one's going to show up. You know, I'm going to have a wedding, no one's going to show up. I'm going to have a birthday party, no one's going to show up. And so it's great that we see so many people here who are excited about the mission of BKC. And as Alex mentioned, today we're going to look at sort of what we've done in the past, what we're thinking about now, what we're thinking about in the future. And so let me just say, we want to hear from you. And so if you have ideas for collaboration, if you have ideas for things we should be or should not be thinking about, please come find someone. Because I think that now more than ever, what we're seeing is the value of interdisciplinary research that doesn't just involve technicians, that doesn't just involve lawyers or policy folks. So please come talk to us because we're excited to find new collaborators and to try to make the world better through technology. So I'm James, so I'm a professor here at Harvard of Computer Science. I also sit on the board of directors for Berkman Klein, and I help to co-PI RSM. And so I'm really excited to have this panel here with some of our illustrious alumni to talk about social media stuff. I mean, that's sort of writ large what RSM was about. And so I'm really curious to hear what the panelists think was interesting, was surprising, what they didn't expect. and what we can look to in the future when it comes to social media. So without further ado, let me pose the first question to the panel. So if you think back on the research that you did when you were at RSM, what's the thing that surprised you the most about social media? What didn't you anticipate? And when you answer, give folks a little bit of background on your research and what you did here before saying what it was that surprised you. So maybe, does anyone want to go first, or should I talk about something? There you go, leadership. That's how you start a panel session.
I read a paper a while back called Stewardship of Global Collective Behavior, and that's how I met you and John. They invited me to give a talk at the opening, I think it was, for RSM. So it's cool to be here at Sunset. But when I was working here at RSM, I worked on trying to understand what the scientific response to social media should be like, and how it should integrate policy. We wrote a piece, James and I and a few others, arguing it should be like the IPCC and climate change, so we should study and understand our social networks the way we do the natural world and preserve it and these sort of things. I think what surprised me most is how far-fetched it became that to exist, right? So like in 2022, there was still some movement to share data with researchers, to do work on it. Companies were interested in finding interventions, and it's 2 years later and that's gone. There's not a lever for us to pull anymore. There's not data to be had. So it's been surprising to see how this movement towards, I think, social media research on the science side has fizzled and evaporated into a lot of like chasing AI hype experiments. And so I think that it's not a happy note to start on, but I've been surprised at how momentum of the community just evaporated within a couple of years. Not that here it did, but the research community, and it's changing so fast. But then also what it was we were trying to fix has changed too. Social media, as we'll talk about, is not what it was. So.
And I think you've seen as a result of some of that sort of an increased emphasis on client-side solutions, on decentralization, basically finding levers that people can have that don't depend on Meta or X, for example, doing the right thing for some definition of right. And so I think that's really interesting because, like, when I went back back in the day in grad school, peer-to-peer stuff was the rage, and sort of there was this anti-centralism thing, and we've seen various waves of that in both technology and in policy, and I think we're having to lean into that more given some of the changes that you mentioned.
So I will start, but I will also kind of foreground when I was in the first class of RSM Fellows, and that was in the fall of 2022. And just to remind everyone, because it seems like it was 10 years ago, not 3, that in the fall of 2022 was the finalization in October of Elon Musk's buying of the Twitter. And I came into RSM writing about a piece called Big Speech, which is now a book, a book project, and that's way to becoming a book, that was about whether or not antitrust could offer a feasible solution to the problems of social media and to big speech. And it was all the rage. I think everyone was kind of talking about this. It was the midst of the administration, with Leah Khan as chair of the FTC, and Tim Wu in the White House, and a number of other people who had championed this cause. And my analysis was kind of like, well, is this going to actually do anything to fix, to fix social media? Are we going to be able to reboot social media? Is antitrust the solution that we want? And my conclusion was actually kind of like, well, the antitrust is the solution for a lot of things, but actually for what specifically social media is. Not big tech, not Google search, not ad tech, not other types of things, which are all very, in my opinion, ripe for antitrust measures, and judges have agreed with me. But the social media in particular, there are some downsides to splitting everything up into smaller platforms. But I was writing this, and it was October, and I was like, maybe I'll just wait and see what happens with Twitter before I launch this entire opus about what exactly big speech is, and this idea that there'll be these giant platforms forever. And I think that what we've seen, if I may, over the last kind of 2 to 3 years, and I think James just tilted at this with what he was saying about the decentralization, is that there has been this slow, rapid decline of open internet principles, and the idea that there is an open and centralized internet at all. Twitter is no longer, in even a marginal way, the space that it was for collective action, for public discussion, for academic discourse, for just community that I think a lot of people found there as a public sphere. And, you know, I'm old enough to have remembered that when everyone was concerned in like the late teens about kind of filter bubbles, and now we just have actual bubbles. We just have actual bubbles that everyone goes to be with like-minded people, whether they're Blue Sky, whether they're X, whether they are, you know, your walled garden of Facebook or whatever it is that you're on. There are various types of platforms, and kind of the loss that we've had in public discourse because of the loss of those communal spaces. And so I kind of really, I guess, to be perfectly honest about it, had to re-examine a lot of my priors about what I thought the solutions to this thing were as like a good liberal, as like a good kind of forward-thinking person that, you know, wanted the internet to still fulfill its promise to people. And one of the things that I've come to is is decentralization a great last gasp? Like, is that something that we absolutely want to have in place as like a fundamental thing? Yes, I think that like probably we want that as, you know, if you're in Mississippi, you can set up a new instance and still be on Blue Sky, even though Blue Sky is like basically right now blocking people in Mississippi from having access to the platform. That's good, in my opinion. But at the same time, it is good to have large speech platforms. And that is actually, I think, kind of a controversial thing. It was a controversial thing to say like 3 years ago, and I think it's still a little bit of a controversial thing to say now. But that is kind of what I worked on and what the time here has really revealed. And, you know, and I just can't, it's crazy to think that I thought that I was going to like come up with an answer to like this rebooting social media problem, like, you know, in that 1 year that we had here, just given how rapidly just in those first 3 months the entire space completely changed.
Yeah, things are moving very quickly. I mean, you know, on the topic of the antitrust stuff, you know, in the Google search case, there was recently a ruling. And what's very interesting is if you listen to how the companies themselves are framing the internet,
Yes.
Google, you know, has tried to make some arguments where they basically said like the open web is essentially dying.
It is.
You know,
This is what Mozilla is saying. Everyone is
Yes.
saying this, and so it is the death of the open web versus AI, and this is the new dichotomy. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I completely agree. I mean, and I do think that like antitrust and the Google decision basically support that, and so it's like the Google decision makes it seem like antitrust and everyone else is giving up on the promise of the open web, and so that actually seems like a cause worth fighting for.
Yeah, and I think later in this panel we'll talk about how AI might change all of this. You kind of hinted at that a little bit, but like if you look at the recent search antitrust ruling, in part, you know, the theory about why the judge didn't drop the hammer there
Yes.
is that the judge was basically thinking, well, first of all, AI is the bigger thing than search, so who cares if Google basically had to
The market's shifted.
The market shifted, and there's also geopolitics in the room as well. And you know, the extent to which that should or should not shape the way we think about, you know, tech regulation, social media, otherwise, is quite interesting, I think. So how about you? So what do you think is the most surprising thing that you sort of see?
So I started here at RSM in spring of 2022, and the main project was to look into how messaging apps were being weaponized in countries to destabilize electoral processes. And my focus was going to be in Brazil. That's where I'm from. And I set up a project called the Sentinela Eleitoral, the Electoral Sentinel. We collaborated with Publica. We set up a infrastructure to monitor Telegram groups and WhatsApp groups to understand how misinformation were being brewed and orchestrated in order to delegitimize the Brazilian electoral process. And we created a portal online where we would do sort of the pre-banking of the misinformation that would surface from these groups to the larger platforms like Twitter, Facebook. It was really interesting because we were able to see how that grew so fast, and the portal became a space where other researchers could come and publish articles as well. Our articles were reaching the Supreme Court of Brazil. They were doing like actions and the go and blocking accounts, suspending the Telegram groups, because they were literally there to orchestrate campaigns to, again, delegitimize the voting machines and so on. So it became, to my surprise, it became one of the references in terms of learning about the process and also to learn more about the disinformation campaigns that were taking place in Brazil at that moment. So much so that the American Political Association gave us an award for that. We were very helpful. We thought that the social media platforms were also happy to see that we were exposing the bad actors trying to game their system. But in fact, the big surprise was that they didn't like it. They did not like it at all. We became one of their main enemies throughout that process. And it's just sad how the realization came that these platforms are not interested in promoting democracy. They're not interested in keeping the internet open. And I became somewhat cynical in the beliefs that yes, there is some hope in the digital world, in the sense that how we live it nowadays on these platforms. So the surprise is a little depressing. I don't see a way out much given how strong they've been, especially with aligning themselves with current governments to reinforce or double down on these strategies and keeping things so under control and geared towards their own profits.
So now I reveal this is actually a bunker, this room. It's a life arc. We've got a bunch of Ensure over there. He knows what I'm talking about. I love Ensure. That's right. Yeah, that's right. I think that's a really interesting point too about this idea that like simultaneously these big tech companies, they're somehow like supranational, but they also sometimes are in cahoots with the local governments. And it seems like the net effect of all of that is not sort of like trending towards what perhaps we in the West might think of as like pro-democracy directions. And I think this gets back once again to some of the questions that Kate was thinking about in terms of like late stage capitalism, or what's the profit motives for these companies? Why is it that this seems to be sort of a steady state right now for these companies? So yeah, it's a heady mix, but yeah. So now that we're in the life arc, we can just chill out and just talk about some lighter issues, such as so of course AI is on everybody's mind. And so we've sort of touched on this a little bit so far, but I'm wondering, what do you think about how, in the context of social media, AI makes things either better or worse? And like I can start off with something maybe while people are thinking. Some folks have heard me rant about this before, but for a very long time out on Reddit or places like this, there's this dead internet theory. There's this theory that essentially most of the content that you see and most of the people that you interact with is fake. It's created by computers. And 15 years ago, the dead internet theory was mostly tinfoil hat people. And sometimes, you'd argue with someone online and you wouldn't like them and you called them a bot. And that was just like a petty, fun thing to say. But you didn't actually think with high probability that they were a bot. You were just like, it's funny for me to accuse you of being an android. Right? But now, if you look at certain Reddits, or subreddits, for example, or on Facebook, you'll see people legitimately say, let's say on the /Boston subreddit, there's like a political campaign going on for various offices. People say, are you a bot in favor of so-and-so? And now that accusation takes on heavier sort of weight, because it is possible this is an LLM you're talking about. And when you listen to what the companies are saying about model collapse and things like this, and the fact that if you have models training on model data, this is a problem. So it seems like we may actually be getting closer to a place where the dead internet theory is substantially true. Where when you do a Google search, most of those results on the first 5 pages are going to come from a bot. When you go on Reddit, absent any other interventions, and some folks from ASML, they talk a little bit about how we're thinking about identity. Absent other interventions, it will be hard for you to tell whether you're talking to a real person or not. So to me, I think that's one of the challenges that you see with AI and social media right now, that it's getting harder to understand what content's authentic. It's getting harder to know if the interactions you're having are actually with a real human being.
Well, I can start. Well, one downside, if you look into the practices of journalism, for example, when you Google something, people don't even go to the search results. They read the Gemini summary, and that has been extremely dangerous because Gemini, Google, scrapes articles from local newspapers and news portals everywhere, and it's taken away the user traffic from those sites to stay only on google.com. And it's taken away, I mean, if it's taking user traffic, it's also taking away revenue from them. So it has become a huge, and not paying anything back to these newspapers because, copyrights, eventually they don't understand the concept of that. Also for the lay user, anyone here on Instagram, I'm sure you have seen how boring it has been to be on that platform, right? AI has turned the recommender system amazing for the platform, not for the user. You try to read anything on this platform, it sounds so all very synthetic, not very genuine. And it's sad that we're losing the organic part of the internet. It's no longer there. I mean, in terms of these big platforms. So hopefully with the end of Twitter, that we saw, becoming X, and we saw things becoming more decentralized in the sense that Twitter was the platform where we saw politicians, academics, celebrities, and now this has broken apart to, academic Twitter has gone to Blue Sky, LinkedIn, and then celebrities have gone mostly to Instagram. So that sort of decentralization could help a little bit, but yet we're still talking about big platforms. And those platforms that try to create a more democratic space, like Twitter in the past, now has become exactly what some platforms try to be, but fail at doing. For example, Gab, Getter, Parler, Social Truth, Truth Social, they all try to be like Twitter, but instead of Twitter becoming the role model, it actually became just like those niche platform for extreme speech. So it truly is the death and terrible moment for this understanding of open web, open internet.
I have much to add to that.
I'm kind of excited about LLMs heat deathing social media. I think the core rot of social media for me was the engagement-driven business model. I think that led to these influential individuals who then disproportionately controlled what was shared on there. The platforms they enjoyed, they wanted to share misleading information, they did. They wanted to share true information, they did. And that sort of just became the way social media works. And a lot of our societies now are kind of dealing with the fallout of that, where the people who were popular on social media 10 years ago because of the viral moment now run governments and fire gnats at people. And that's the space we're in. And I think that the broadcast model is really vulnerable to AI LLMs because you're effectively trying to get as much information out as possible, make it engaging. But alternative models like group messages, like text messages with your phone with friends and Signal, that I feel like has had a resurgence in the wake of this. Like you're texting your friend. And so a lot of like the function we used to get out of social media, I think, has moved to chat messages in these places, which I think is a first start. And I'm looking forward to seeing what business models can thrive in this space where authenticity has value because it's rare. And I think that, if anything, it might be nice to see the accelerating heat death of Facebook, of Twitter, of these platforms that are large and didn't have anyone's interest approach.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that I will add on to that is like the one thing that I feel like is missing from this piece of kind of why people have migrated from these platforms and why these roles is that there has been a capitalist urgency for that. That has been, people have demanded that. People want more privacy and to be able to curate the groups that they themselves broadcast to. Like they don't want, like all of us did not all of a sudden realize that on Facebook, everyone that we friended, from the guy at the cocktail party to our next door neighbor, could see us posting about, oh shit, our next door neighbor, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. And there was this moment of kind of like this curated, this lack of friction between our various types of social worlds, right? And so like people have built that back in a lot of places, and it's made these places less interesting, and it's made it a prime place for milquetoast content that AI can capitalize on and kind of meet for our needs. This is kind of adjacent to like James's question, but I actually was gonna respond to like the idea of broadcast thing, because I think that like what social media gives us is many-to-many broadcasting in a way that has never existed in human history, ever before, and who knows if it ever will again. But that changed the model entirely. We were unleashed from a gatekeeping system. I mean, there's still gatekeepers, but there was a direct way to access the masses that you never had before. And that has had all of the downsides and all of the upsides that one might imagine. What I do think is super interesting about everything you mentioned, from like the AI search results to everything else, is it just reminds me of the conversations that we had about how the internet was killing journalism. And then journalism has still, in a different form, maintained and decided to accommodate like an SEO mentality, a search engine optimization mentality. It became completely dependent on, it got in the ad business, which it already was in, by the way. That's how most of journalism was funded, subscriptions and ads. And it got into the ad business, and it retooled its entire business model on a new type of ad model around the internet. Now that model has changed again, and it's unclear how that is going to survive for sure. But like, I just kind of want to point out that, to your point, I do wonder if like there will be a hunger and a thirst for like the non-agentic bot voices, and that will give fuel to kind of a rise of new gatekeepers or a rise of new type of establishment journalism, that people want to get their evening news in one place again, or some type of kind of like consolidated media ecosystem again. That we will have a maximalization of this kind of segmentation, and like it will come back together. I think that is a perfectly plausible kind of alternative scenario.
Yeah, I think it's always hard in situations like this to sort of like calibrate one's own cynicism, because like, you know, sort of like and like I struggle with this a lot, because like if you just sort of look at, you know, the plain facts of things, it's very easy to say, oh, things are sort of like getting worse along multiple axes. But then you talk to older people and they're like, but we've always said that.
Yeah.
Like when I was young, we always think, and like if that were all true, then we would have reverted back to single cell organisms that are just crawling around, you know, the savannah. So it is interesting. And like, you know, one thing that's kind of interesting that I think is very relevant to social media is like, at least there's this sort of folk theory that like 30 years ago there was a monoculture in many respects, with respect to where news came from, with respect to like, you know, music or things like that. You know, like when I was growing up, at least so the folk theory says, like you had to have an opinion on Michael Jackson. You didn't have to like him, you know, but you had to have an opinion on him, because like his music was everywhere. And so now, like, you know, like I think I'm pretty hip. I'm on YouTube, TikTok. You know, I talk to my students sometimes. You know, like, yeah, man, I'm into like, you know, like West African metal, folk, funk music. You know, like this very specific niche that I wouldn't even know how to search for. Like, how would that even stumble upon me? And like, there's a question of, is that good or bad? You know, to the question of like filter bubbles. Like, there are some type of filter bubbles we can imagine are bad. There are some types that we might imagine are good, because there's a group that's like, you know, traditionally been sort of like hurt by regular sort of spaces that now find that solace. So I think it's, to me at least, that's one of the big challenges that I think we in the social media space and sort of just people interested in tech and policy in general have to struggle with, which is how do we calibrate the cynicism, how do we not just reject the new because it seems new. And so this maybe is sort of a follow-up to that line of thought. So, you know, AI has some downsides and some upsides in social media. Where do you folks think sort of the balance of power is right now? Like, would you say that right now, like on net, AI is doing more harm than good in social media? The reason I say on net is because, you know, think about like moderation. So like a thing that's like very challenging for these decentralized social media systems is like, how do you deal with like content takedown requests? How do you deal with like moderation of hateful comment? And so at least in theory, you can imagine relying on LLMs for that, or AIs in general. And that seems like maybe not bad. But what do you folks think about the net balance of AI being good or bad for social media?
Well, I'll jump on that just because you specifically kind of mentioned like my kind of area, one of my areas of research, which is content moderation, and that I know for a fact that like most of the content moderation that is happening right now there have been a number of really good tools. One of them is being developed by Dave Wilner, who was the one of the individuals who at Facebook in 2007 crafted the first community standards and the resultant kind of rules for Facebook behind the thing, left in 2013 and did a bunch of other stuff. And he's been training a model that is going to be open source and like available to everyone that basically does that. I mean, and it has absolutely huge effects. You can tailor, I mean, you can customize it in a myriad of ways to make it kind of so that you have more of like a 4chan type space or more of a kind of like next door type of space, depending on kind of what you want. and it allows people to do this type of moderation in ways that doesn't rely on human labor for it to take down the worst parts of the internet and to police the worst types of conversations and the worst sides of people. And it does so in a way that is often what I find most interesting about a lot of this AI. When you do a lot of this pattern recognition stuff, they are better pattern recognition than individuals, than humans in a lot of capacities. So I do think that that's a really positive use of AI that's coming with content moderation. Now, what's really interesting is that we've just regulated to have humans in the loop in a lot of different capacities, in the EU anyways. And so like I think that this is just going to be kind of, you know, I feel like everything is coming, as much as we like being tech people and thinking that we're at like kind of an end stage, it's like all first principles. Like it really truly is just philosophical conversations of like, well, we're talking about authenticity, but like what do we mean by authenticity? What on earth does that word mean? Like why is, you know, and I think that there is a lot of kind of what we want a human in the loop, but why do we want a human in the loop? If humans introduce literal error to like our judgments, like in doctors' decisions, in medicine, and like in engineering choices and whatever else. What do we think that we're getting? Is it authenticity or dignity? What is it that we're trying to get back? And a lot of these things are just actually just very heady philosophical conversations and hard to move from those types of conversations to like, so what do we do now? So like what law should we pass? And what technical specification should it happen in? And like this is, I feel like, a little bit the speed loop that we are running, the speed run that we're kind of on right now. And it makes me very, I don't know, hesitant about a lot of kind of the stuff that's being drafted in like kind of in the Jay-Z kind of like trifecta of like, we want it now. Like we don't know what we want, but we want it now. And this is, I feel like we have started to really get over our skis on that in like a lot of different ways. And it would just be kind of great that if AI could actually, in a weird way, buy us some time while it continues to be kind of bad at whatever it's doing and is like mid and doesn't get better. If we could just make that happen for a little while, that would actually be okay with me.
So if I could jump on that, so we can't just believe that AI happens in a void, in a political void. It has been very much a tool to impose political views. Yes, maybe AI has been better in dealing with content moderation when you have people trying to commit suicide on live Instagram or so on. Yeah, that's great, and it's stopping that. But for example, in countries where some extreme speech is not allowed, then they don't want to do anything about this. Actually, these tools are colonizing the ways that people think about free speech outside the United States. In Brazil, for example, racist speech is not protected by the laws of free speech. It should not be on the internet. When flagged, it should be removed. Whether you believe on that or not, that's the law that we have in Brazil. In Europe, you cannot deny the existence of the Holocaust. That's also a crime. It should not be online. So what these AI platforms are doing are reinforcing the values that come from the California school of thought that truly believe that they're even beyond governments. I mean, they're siding with the US government now because it's a political game that they have to play to sort of reinforce these AI policies in other countries. But soon enough, they will say goodbye to the American government and be like on their own, subjecting the government to their own policies. So that is my biggest concern right now, is that, yes, there is a way that we can maybe tame or through regulation try to tame some of these policies to regulate AI. But if we miss the momentum here, I don't know what actor in society could be strong enough to help us deal with these advancements of AI.
I mean, I drank the UN Kool-Aid the last 9 months, so I've been really into the idea of like development is freedom and the kind of the Marxist end thinking. And a lot of what we wrote this report that came out earlier this year that everyone here should read, the Freedom Development Report. We talked about like what does it mean for say AI to do a good thing for humanity? We anchored it a lot in whether it expands freedoms and agency or contracts them. So that's how I would think about your question sort of normatively. And now, you know, AI in a broad sense, and recommender algorithms, I think contracted agency and led to economic inequalities and reduced freedom of speech actually for the vast majority of people. If you look at the reach of everyone, most people had less reach than they had before country. LLMs, on the other hand, have these like really agency expanding things. So you can translate Wikipedia into Swahili. You can get a better weather forecast anywhere. These things are like very possible to build. You can build them today. That expand agency for a lot of people everywhere. With the tech we already have with mid AI, you can do a lot of agency expanding things. Unfortunately, the current sort of business model for it is like talk to this like it's your friend, right? And have it be sycophantic, and that I think is agency contracting for the most part. Although some people find it helpful with proofreading or editing or translating. Again, it's a balance of things. So I think it's currently not engineered along an axis of making social media better or worse. I think it's just being injected in everywhere and anywhere it possibly can. See these cases like the horrible stories that Jeff Horowitz reports on in Meta's AI and their LLMs. And you have these wonderful stories of people like learning to do skills or just feeling powered by it. So I think the answer is like, it's just, the coin's flipping in the air, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'm going to steal that California way of thinking. That's smart Bay Area thinking. That's right. And I think that like you touched on, well, everyone really touched on something that I find very fascinating about the current AI economy, which is that like it's just being pushed everywhere. And like because it's being pushed everywhere, you just get in these weird sort of like feedback cycles. Like to me, I think one big example besides like the dead internet theory is like the job market theory, the resume sort of submission pipeline. So, because the job market's tight, job seekers employ AI tools to automate the writing of cover letters and resumes and so on and so forth. Then because, the employers are being spammed from their perspective by so many of them, they employ AI so there's just like, it's just crazy. And it like reminds me of like Dune, like the whole Dune series, like, y'all, if we would just stop taking the spice. If we all just collectively agree, the spice thing is out of control. Like, who's gonna be the first mover? Because taking the spice, like you gotta take the spice.
It must flow.
Yeah, exactly. It must flow. And so that I think is another weird thing where I think like as technologists sort of, or regulators, policy people and social media or beyond, you have to think about the economics of stuff. And why is it that we feel these imperatives to put AI everywhere? And what is the goal? I think that something that Kate mentioned is very interesting, that this has come up in a lot of different panelists' comments, but for some people, particularly low resource people, AI can be very empowering. So like there are ideas that have been proposed for things like, LLM public defenders. Like at first glance, like that's insane and a terrible idea. But then it's like, well, is it though? Why is it? I'll tell you.
We gatekeep legal knowledge. We gatekeep Westlaw. We gatekeep Pacer. We gatekeep all of these things. They cost tons of money for people to access. Literally, lawyering is consulting. It is like a pay where you get trained to be professional consultants to people and charge them for it, so that we can interpret the laws in ways that are. Sorry, I don't mean to, but this is like 100%. Like, why would we not allow that to become empowering for people and allow people to empower themselves with these tools instead of gatekeeping that?
I think somebody suing my old landlord like 2 weeks transport, and I'm using so much ChatGPT to figure that out.
That's right.
It's great.
That's right. Yeah,
Send it to me before you like.
That's right. First RSM fellow sent to jail. Yeah, I think it gets back to some of these arguments about dignity and like what it means to like accept that a mistake has been foisted upon you. Like some people would just prefer, like if there's a medical misdiagnosis, I would prefer that mistake to be foisted upon me by a human. Just almost like just humanistic or,
Such an interesting
And like it's the same thing with self-driving cars and this kind of stuff. Like even if self-driving cars are 10 times better than a person, there's some people who think like I would not want to be hit by a robot. And that's the thing that I think you see a lot in social media when you get back to authenticity. Like, what does it mean that like I see some TikTok and like it was made by AI? The dance is pretty cool. I'm gonna do that dance. I like it. But this, like, am I being defiled spiritually somehow because like I'm dancing an AI dance? Anyways, so let's move on. So okay, I think we're doing pretty good on time. So if I came to you, I'm gonna present two hypotheticals to you. So here's the first hypothetical. So I came to you and I just make you just emperor of the world. Maybe because you control the spice, because whoever controls the spice, you see the documentaries. So you're emperor of the world. If you can make one intervention on social media, one change in the way that it operates, what do you think would be the highest impact intervention to make social media better?
I wouldn't get rid of social media, but I would take away the current financial model that social media runs on. And I think it was last year on BKC's 25th anniversary, the last day he gave a talk, and I think he said, I don't know if he's listening to me, but I hope I don't misquote him, but he said something like, that I was really thinking about this, it took, I was thinking throughout the year, that he said that there's nothing particularly wrong with social media, but with the financial model behind it, which is so true, right? It's simple, but it's so true. I don't know, Jay-Z, maybe if you remember, but I think he said that, and ever since I kept thinking about it, and I think that's true, and who am I to say that Lessig is wrong? But yeah, I think the financial model for sure.
I'm gonna double click that, because if you think about, if we built our roads on the same business model, like early on we started constructing all the roads for cars to drive on, the model was, we'll see billboards, and the more billboards you see, the better the road has done. There would have been a lot of accidents, it would take forever to get anywhere, right? Traffic would be awful, you would sit there staring at ads all day, not going anywhere. And it's not surprising that the same thing led to that for information foraging, right? It's the same goal, go there to get somewhere and figure something out. So yeah, I would turn it into, I wouldn't make the government own it, but it'd be nice if we treated it like infrastructure with like federated ways of building it across scales. So there's no centralization, but not just decentralized, but like fundamentally different funding model.
I'm making a face because I'm like, have you seen the government right now? Like, do you like? I know, but it doesn't. You don't get to ratchet it. You don't have to pick. You have to account for like the power to be consolidated, and I think that consolidating tech and I think that the most dangerous thing that has happened in like the last 10 years in particular is the I would say the last 6 months, let me actually change that, is the unabashed like consolidation of power between government and like the state and tech companies and the platforms. Tech platforms gave us an ability to route around the problem of state censorship and state control. And what you now have is but they also gave states the ability to route around the problem of privacy, exactly, the Fourth Amendment, for instance. And so so state surveillance has been empowered by these private tech companies as well. And these are like two sides of the same coin. And I just think that this could, like, essentially, like in Jack Balkin's kind of free speech triangle framework, you have collapsed the triangle into an isosceles, and it's lining up with the big tech and states getting closer and closer together, and the interests of those people getting closer and closer together and lining up against users. I will also push back on the idea that I think that necessarily, I don't disagree with the fact that there's nothing wrong with social media and the financial system is bad, but I would say that it's not like roads, because I don't think that the high levels of the internet that we're talking about when we talk about social media are anything like roads.
It's not as
I know, but I actually think that's an important analogy to push back on, because what it is like is much more like newspapers, which absolutely did use ad tech and used advertising and subscription-based models so that they could pay to put like the Somalian famine on the front page of the paper, and like you would still read it because you wanted to get to the more engaging things like the sports page or the comic section or like whatever else it was that you wanted to see. And so this engagement model of like being able to engage and therefore like and funding that with like various types of advertising and that being your model is how we've done media for time immemorial. I think that's under discussed, but I will just say really quickly that I think that if there was one thing I was going to change, it would be very small, but I would change the actual hardware. This is a small intervention, but I think it would be an important one. I would write, if I was going to do this is way too small for Master of the Universe kind of question, but I would just pass a law that mandated that tech companies had to make dumb phones. Like, it's not going to be in their it's not going to be in their best interest. It doesn't going to make money. They can't upsell it to sell ads to kids. They can't do whatever, but I would make dumb phones a mandated technology that if you have a certain type of market cap, you also have to make dumb phones that have a certain type of thing that like have 3 apps on them that kids can have from age 0 to like 18, and like your parents can pick them and whatever. And it's that simple. And that we do not need to keep handing what is the equivalency of just like these like high caliber machine guns into kids' hands every single time. But the market in this sense, in the sense that we have this incredibly high driven, ad driven market, is never going to incentivize that hardware. And so I think that kind of hardware level would be like the best place to kind of make this change.
It's interesting. I mean, I think the thing that came out sort of implicitly in all the panelists' comments was, in some sense, a pushback against scale.
Yeah.
So, and that's a thing that I think a lot about too of late. This idea that you can look at a lot of Burning Man is an example of this. When Burning Man was small, a bunch of hippies come together, want to dance around it, that's great, Mercury is ascending. But then the bigger it gets, the more problems you have, And I think a lot of smallish communities are like that. And I think that's one reason you see sort of a push towards smaller communities now. Because people are basically saying Facebook, regardless of whether you're liberal or conservative or whatever, it just doesn't feel right. Because all of a sudden your feed is spam with stuff that just doesn't feel neighborly anymore. So I think that's really interesting that when you think about, if we buy into the premise that social media intrinsically is not bad, what is it that kind of corrupted it along the way? And increasingly I'm thinking that it is this fact that we try, getting back to this sort of Bay Area way of thinking, scale is a goal in and of itself. So you talk to engineers, talk to VPs, they say, we want the hockey stick growth. We want, trillions of users, and that's just a good, just sort of on its face, and I think we have to start questioning that. So maybe for the last question, this is sort of related to something that Kate was saying. So let's say, another hypothetical. So let's say I hand each of you a small child. Okay? Just don't let it just happen, okay? So I hand you a small child, and I say, you're now responsible for raising this child and making sure that I'm the moderator, I can set up these scenarios, okay? So I've procured 3 children, I've given them one to each of you, and you have to make sure they rise, and become a morally upstanding individual. When would you let them start using social media?
So first and foremost, I would call the cops if they haven't.
That's a true right answer.
Point child protective services, whatever they decide. I don't think the question's answerable, right? So if I say 60, right, it's right now, it's at 2, 3. And assuming it's not a newborn, that feels that 16 years from now, what's the internet gonna be? I don't know, what is social media then? It might be way worse and just full of LLM predators, or it might be some more authentic thing where you just text your friends. And I don't know, so.
It really depends on where you are, in which culture you are. For example, I do work in the favelas, in the shanty towns of Brazil, and I followed this kid. He was 13 years old, and he was one of the few kids with a Xingling, which was the Chinese knockoff smartphone version. And then he couldn't read or write, but he was able to log onto Facebook and post things. And the thing he would do was to post a selfie of himself, so his mom could check his Facebook at her workplace and check that he was okay, that there was no shootout happening, that he was hurt or anything. So every other hour he would get on the phone, post a selfie, then his mom would go in, like the photo, which was a signal that she acknowledged that, and he could go on to play on the streets or whatever. So, and he was only 13. Would I give my kid, this is exactly why I don't want to have kids, man, to not answer this question. But in this scenario where I am in the United States, my kid would go to a middle school, an average American middle school here. I don't think I would have given him a smartphone, given, the bullying, I don't know, all the things that happen on social media. I wouldn't want the kid to be exposed to these things, but then those are different scenarios, right? So I think it really depends, and I think this is one of the problems of these policies, trying to regulate the uses of technology by children, is that they want to follow the same model as big text, the one size fits all, and you will not fit all. And rejecting technology in this sense is also a huge act of privilege, because those facing precarities, they depend on certain technologies to even survive. So it has to be, your question has to be a little bit more unpacked in that sense, but in a way, it would really depend on the context.
Yeah, I would say that, so Jonathan Haidt's work and the English generation, which I'm sure everyone is aware of in this room, I think is really good work, and probably, I have a bunch of problems with the impact of the studies and things like that, and some of the policies that he chooses to adopt in response to that. And one of the reasons I have a problem with those policies that he chooses to respond to is I think that what he is responding to, super interestingly, is a moment in which there were no native parents who were native in the technology that their children were using, and thus had no idea what they were saying yes to when they allowed them to go onto social media or allowed them to have a smartphone. They knew the things that it would provide, the safety, the geolocation, the ability to text and pick up. That seems easier than carrying a quarter around when all the payphones are being torn out, and all of these types of, all of these things make a lot of sense. And there was no understanding of the bullying that would happen online. There was no understanding of the ability to access pro-ana material. There was no understanding of all of this type of thing. And it's to make a crude example, it is a lot the period of really uncomfortable, a period in which a lot of people died because there were no seatbelts in cars. A period in which we did not understand how dangerous this new technology could be and how quickly and how easily people could die or be harmed. Yet everyone jumped in and used it. And I think, and it became essential. It became essential to life and essential to human welfare and thriving. And I think that, I hope that that this is changing, that the agitation is real, that people have been heard, that these things are happening. And I think a lot of his policies are misplaced for this reason, and his data is episodic. Because it is not going to reflect this changing moment and these changing generations, and that there can be a lost generation or a anxious generation that comes out of a period of time, and it can be a very real thing, and yet it's not something that you regulate from. It is a thing that we adjust to socially, or that we pick and choose what we decide to regulate from as the stickiness of the problem it endures. And so I guess I would say that I don't think that I'm gonna let my kid probably have a full-on smartphone at any point until 15, and that has all of that that doesn't have severe ratcheting down on a lot of the privacy controls. And social media, it's that's really about what my kid is frankly, and how I know my kid, and right? And also, I don't know how much as a parent you can do to stop those types of things also. I've been a lot of places I shouldn't have been on the early internet. And that is also a part of, your own development as a human being, and your own rights and privacy as an adolescent, that I think that we shouldn't give short shrift to, because they're huge, huge moments in our own development as human beings. And it's one of the reasons I do what I do today, because of all of those experiences.
That is a great moment of somewhat hope for us all, I think. So I think that that's very true. I think that you're exactly right. I remember back in the day, I was on bulletin boards and all kinds of crazy. This is dating myself.
AOL chat rooms.
Yeah. The way that I learned that there was a difference between local calls and long distance calls is that I read a magazine and they had a BBS in Las Vegas you could call to. And I was just a phone number. So I just called the phone, and my dad comes in, and he's like, "So what's going on here, son?" $200 of phone calls. And I'm like, "That's impossible. It's only in Las Vegas." And so I think that's a great point, because I think that kids are smart. Anyone who's been in a library knows that kids will find ways to get around filters and stuff like that. And so I do think that's a really great note to end on, because we do want to try to calibrate our cynicism and try to see that there are good aspects of social media as well as bad. Okay, well with that, let's thank all the great panelists one more time. And now I will hand the mic back to us.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. I think we're gonna take a 10-minute break, right? And then we'll reconvene shortly for ASML.